Hello everybody and welcome to the 7th video in our series of videos on war and peace in Europe between 1920 and 1945. So the last time out we looked at Hitler's rise to power, and today we are going to look at how he consolidated that power and what life was like in Germany under Hitler. As always, we begin with our learning outcomes. So by the end of this presentation you guys should know 4 steps that led to Hitler establishing total control over the state of Germany. Second, you guys should be able to describe 4 aspects of life in Germany under the Nazis. And finally, you guys should know 3 things about education or the economy under Nazi rule. So as we begin with the consolidation of power. After being appointed Chancellor or Prime Minister by President Hindenburg on the 30th of January 1933, Hitler immediately called for a new election to take place in March of 1933. In an attempt to win a majority in the Reichstag, or the German parliament. However, 6 days before the vote, the Reichstag was set on fire by a young Dutch communist as a form of protest. Hitler used this event to force Hindenburg to suspend civil liberties and to ban the Communist Party. And Hitler's troops, the SA and the SS, used terror tactics and beatings and intimidation to increase the Nazi support in the election. However, the Nazis still didn't get the majority that they wanted, but thanks to this continued intimidation by the SA and SS of politicians and propaganda scaring people into thinking a communist coup was about to take place, Hitler convinced the Reichstag to pass a thing called the Enabling Act on the 24th of March 1933, and this allowed Hitler to rule by decree, just as we saw that Mussolini was able to rule by decree. By July of 1933, Hitler had used his power to ban all other political parties. Hitler also used the Gestapo. So this was his secret police. These were a division of the SS. And he used them to root out any opposition to his dictatorial rule or to censor any media that said anything negative about him. The Gestapo, they could arrest anybody with a cause and they could spy on people. After the Enabling Act, there were really only 2 real threats to Hitler's power. The first was from within his own party and from the brown shirts, who were under control of this man here, Ernst Röhm. So Röhm was somewhat independent of Hitler. He was in charge of the SA and he held differing views to Hitler on certain policies. Hitler had been convinced to act against Rome by leading industrialists in Germany. They disliked Rome's support for workers' rights and stuff like this. So Hitler decided to kill Rome and the leaders of the brown shirts. And this was known as the Night of the Long Knives. It happened on the 30th of June 1934. The consequences then of this is that Hitler won further support from the industrialists and old army generals in Germany. Also now the SS became the dominant force in Nazi Germany, with the SA now becoming kind of subordinate to the army that Hitler was in the process of building back up, as part of his plans to break the Treaty of Versailles. The other threat to his power was President Hindenburg, who actually had the power to fire Hitler as Chancellor. Hindenburg had been a war hero during World War I, and he was pleased when Hitler when he favoured the army over the SA. Hindenburg had reservations about Hitler, but kept him in power. In August of 1934, Hindenburg died, and Hitler passed a law merging the offices of Chancellor and President, and he installed himself as their Führer. So what was life like in Nazi Germany? As we already stated, the SS and the Gestapo suppressed any opposition to Hitler. On top of that, laws were brought in to make sure people stayed in line. Informants were to report any suspicious activity of their neighbours. Children were asked to spy on their kids. Juries were abolished, and only judges who could take an oath of allegiance to Hitler could pass judgment. On top of that, the first concentration camps were set up, and this is where political opposition would be sent. Dachau, as you can see here on the map, was set up in 1933. Another Another aspect of life in Nazi Germany that allowed Hitler to consolidate power was the use of propaganda. The Nazis took propaganda to a level that really hadn't been seen before, and the man mainly responsible for it was the Minister for National Enlightenment and Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels. Pro-Nazi propaganda was everywhere with posters like this. Goebbels also provided cheap radios so that everyone could listen to broadcasts of Hitler's speeches. Pro-Nazi reports and movies were put in cinemas. Goebbels also helped organize great rallies which were held in Nuremberg every year. These were known as the Nuremberg rallies, just to show the strength of the German nation. In 1936, the Olympics in Berlin were held, and Hitler wanted to show the supremacy of the Aryan race, which was famously upset by Jesse Jackson, African American, beating all comers in a race. But again, it was an attempt to use propaganda to show how good things were. Even education was used to promote Nazi views. All classrooms had a portrait of Hitler and swastikas hanging. All teachers had to be members of the Nazi-controlled union. History books were rewritten to glorify Germany's past. Biology was used to prove Nazi racial theories. PE was emphasized to create good young soldiers. Youth movements were set up. The Hitler Youth, much like the Italian Balilla who we met before, it was like a Nazi version of the Boy Scouts, where young boys were kind of indoctrinated and brainwashed into Nazi ideologies. They would join this at the age of 14 and would be in it from 14 to 18, and then would go on and join the army afterwards. The League of German Maidens was also established for young girls. Again, around the age of 14, they would join this, and that was to emphasize that they become good wives and mothers to the German soldiers. The final aspect of life in Germany was the economy. So remember, after the 1929 Wall Street crash, unemployment in Germany skyrocketed to 6 million. That is about a third of the working population. Hitler's economic policy was geared towards one thing, and that was war. The Nazis borrowed excessively, extensively, hoping that their eventual expansion east, which is a policy we will look at when we look at his foreign policy, he believed that this expansion east would help them pay back the massive debts that they were accumulating by the time they were due. There was a massive push for rearmament, with money going towards ships and planes and submarines and weapons. Just like Mussolini, public work schemes were adopted for propaganda purposes. Motorways known as autobahns were built. Housing schemes were built. And rich industrialists were encouraged to expand. At the expense of small businesses, monopolies were favoured. And a lot of people got very rich setting up factories such as Volkswagen, to try to produce cars, and to kind of have a monopoly over the motor industry in the country. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. You guys should now know 4 steps that led to Hitler establishing total control. You guys should be able to describe 4 aspects of life in Germany under the Nazis. And finally, you guys should know 3 things about education or the economy under Nazi rule. Thanks for watching. Hope you guys got something good from this video.